open that page, I'll search for my fix, find what I need in the deep dark abyss.
Welcome to another episode of AI Skeptics. Today, we're really pleased to have with us Laura McCleary, who's going to talk to us about her absolutely fantastic essay, which was called "There Are No Machines of Loving Grace Without People." Brilliant essay. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself to the listenership?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Laura McCleary. I'm Senior Director of Unidos US Policy and Advocacy Shop, but I write about AI as well as an interest all the way going back many decades.
It's great to have you here, Laura.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Thanks for joining.
I noticed your even before I saw your essay, although I did see your essay earlier than this week, but this week we were on the same call talking about AI with concerned scientists, and I was like, okay, Laura's just a brilliant speaker. We got to get her on the podcast. And that's not always true. Like you meet people that are really good essayists, and you're just like, no, you can't. You're not a talker. But Laura, you're a talker. And so it's like this. This is going to be a really easy podcast because we've already divvied up the three topics, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask you to talk about the thing, and you're going to hopefully just spend 10 minutes talking about it. I will do nothing except agree with you. Actually, Jake, you're going to start.
Yeah, I'm going to go first. And hello, Skeptics Nation. It's great to see you all again. And I wanted to ask you about one of the first parts of your No Machines of Loving Grace essay. And before I even dive into it, let me just appreciate a Richard Brautigan reference in the title. Richard Brautigan is one of my favorites, and Trout Fishing in America is my actual favorite book.
Wait, I don't even know what that is. Explain this reference.
Oh, dude, Richard Brautigan. I mean, I won't steal it from you, but Richard Brautigan is a whimsical, excellent poet from the 60s.
Yeah.
And he wrote, well, do you want to talk about Machines of Loving Grace, Laura?
Well, it's a very interesting poem which describes a kind of pastoral scene with robotic dinosaur-like animals kind of grazing. And I think and Dario Amodei wrote an essay about referencing Brautigan's poem Machines of Loving Grace and thinking about kind of what a benevolent version of AI would be like. But when you look at the poem, it's not really clear that it's not very tongue-in-cheek, right? The image that he's creating there, I think, is ironic, which is the idea that there's something very sterile and hollowed out about imagining a biological world that's actually populated by machinery and robots as opposed to by biology. And the essay that I wrote closes with this line from E.E. Cummings, who's one of my favorite poets, and I've read a lot of his work. And I've always had this line, a world of made is not a world of born, in my head. For years I've had this line, and I didn't know its significance. And then it struck me that actually there's this unbelievable complexity in the biological world that we only are now kind of trying to unpack in any systematic way. And that it's actually the poverty of our understanding of the richness of our own human experience, and even of the very most fundamental kind of plant life and world we inhabit, that gives us all of these reductivist ways of thinking about AI. Right?
Laura, I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but I just need to agree with you so vehemently right now. And it's I was going to say, and I will say, this is reminiscent of the the tech bros who were rooting for the wrong side in Star Wars, they didn't get it. They didn't get the point of these allegories whatsoever. But it also and this is straight to the point that Jake is trying to get to, and I'm not even going to let him do it, is what we keep coming back to in our AI Skeptics podcast is this notion that we went way too far as a culture with the metaphor of our brain as a computer. And unfortunately, the people who have power right now really believe in that metaphor.
But you point out in your essay, concrete evidence that metaphor is wrong. So you talk about somatic markers that were, discussed by scientist Antonio Damasio. So it's like this idea that there is something embodied, there is something that's going on in our human embodied decision making in particular that is not just replicable in a computer. So can you talk about somatic markers and how that factors into our decisions?
So I was in law school in the Bay Area, and I got this Buick Regal, this huge car with a bench seat in the front, and it still had a tape deck. And in this old bookstore, I found like a book on tape, which was Descartes' Error by Antonio Damasio. So you have to picture that I'm listening to Damasio's like beautiful voice reading this book that he wrote, driving across the like Utah desert in my white Buick Regal with the red velour interior. And
Stop me!
Yeah, it was red velour, fuzzy dice, like the whole thing. It was great. And
it's like a velvet cake, like on wheels. I love it.
Pretty much, yeah. And so this was a long time ago that I was exposed to this book, but it's really fundamental, I think. What Damasio did was he looked at this incident involving this guy named Phineas Gage, and Phineas Gage was around the 1840s, late 1840s, and he was working, and he had an accident where a metal rod went very cleanly all the way up through his skull and out the other side. And so he had this like very precise kind of brain injury to his, a section of his brain only very, very concretely and discreetly. And so he did recover from that injury, but he was a different person. So all of the historical record says like he wasn't himself anymore, and he started cursing, and he wasn't able to go to work, and he wasn't able to make good decisions. And actually, they preserved his skull to show exactly where the injury was. So then what Damasio does in the book is he relates him to a current patient he has that he names Ellis. And he says this person has the same injury, and he sort of reconstructs how that personality change happened, even though this person was still able to use language and like act in sort of human ways, right? They weren't reasoning fully in the way that a person reasons. So from that, he starts to think about whether actually the way that we go through decision making is not kind of our Cartesian model from Descartes, right? Like the brain in a vat, we're like a robot or computer making like lists of pros and cons and kind of weighing them out in some hyper rational way. What we do is, so imagine like you have to choose between, going to a birthday party with your favorite friend or having a dinner at home with your family. And you're trying to decide what you want to do. You imagine being at the birthday party, and you imagine being at home with your family, and you actually feel in your body like which of those things you prefer. And then you choose. And that's how we come to decisions very instantaneously.
I love my family, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like you're going to the party. Like whoever, it's like, that's how, so we're feeling it. And it's that feeling that arises in our physical being is a somatic marker. That's like the thing that we say like, okay, we feel better going to the party, some of us, right? Or we feel better being at home, depending on our mood that night or like how we are as a person. And so in that way, we are able to short circuit, because otherwise we would just be sitting there, these sort of cognitive machines like spinning and unable to make decisions in real time, even around things that might be like quite important to make decisions in a timely way. I think, that deeply embodied way of making decisions is the kind of piece that's missing from, it's not just the tech bros. It goes all the way back to Descartes and this idea that I think therefore I am, and this sort of brain in a vat kind of model that we carry around. And it's particularly seductive in the area of AI because we tend to think about everything's in language. And so LLMs, large language models, that particular expression of AI is using sort of our operative, basic code for how we make decisions and how we express decisions. So that, that's why we kind of confer or generalize, like we're seeing, Jesus in the moon, all of these personality characteristics onto what is actually like a predictive technology.
So, I mean, when I quit my job at the hedge fund during the credit crisis, it was like a stomach ache I had every morning, and I remember having this, like, I'm making more money than I've ever made. Like, this work, I'm learning a lot. It's interesting work, but like the stomach ache was like louder and louder in a certain sense. And it ultimately, like, I just woke up one morning, I was like, I got to quit. It's not rational. It's just a stomach problem I'm having. Is that a somatic? Was that
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of times when we have to make a hard decision, like which college to go to or which job to take or whatever, we're going to kind of feel our way. And we imagine afterwards we have a story to tell our folks, like, oh, I had to quit because, or I had to go to this college because. But it's actually this kind of informed exercise of intuition that is more felt than we want to acknowledge, because it makes it seem like we're doing things to ourselves or to others on like kind of some kind of emotional impulse, right? But it's really that the process of emotional reasoning is helping us sort through all the factors that we might list and the factors that we're too afraid to admit to ourselves, and then make a decision out of that moment.
Are there people that don't have the somatic markers as much as others?
Yeah. There's probably all kinds of neurodivergences where people are unable, like some people are sort of caught in a more rational kind of warp, right? And so in that warp that they're not able to kind of feel how they feel. There's actually alexithymia is like a neurodivergence where you can't really give words to your feelings, and you can't put, and so that can be very disorienting if you're trying to apply somatic markers to making decisions. Those folks come across as like hyper rationalists and feeling when they still do have feelings, but they're not able to like really put the words to them. So, I think the sort of, these differences among people also tend to mask, that this is a part of our kind of common human experience about decision making.
One thing I really liked in your description of that process, like how did the somatic markers actually come to life? It's like you imagine yourself in that scenario. You imagine yourself at the birthday party or at the family dinner. It's like an imaginative exercise. It's not making a list of pros and cons. It's like simulating what reality is going to look like to you in these different hypotheticals. And that's really different. You in a different part of your essay, you talk about Kahneman system 1, system 2 kind of thinking, and that I think Kathy's topic, which is coming right up, might go in that direction. But like, it just occurred to me that the exercise of imagining how it might play out is actually like, that's something very human to do, because you're imagining yourself and how you would feel, as you said, and it doesn't seem like something an LLM could even fake. It's really about how you would respond in that situation.
Yeah. And I think so you're stacking, you have these emotional responses, which are part of the way that you short circuit while feeling your way to decision making on the one hand. And on the other hand, you also have the sort of descriptive models that Daniel Kahneman gave us in Thinking Fast and Slow, which is like you have sort of thing 1 and thing 2 inside your brain. And thing 1 is the like evolutionarily adaptive, fast way of making decisions where you're using what he called heuristics, which is like, I have a general belief of something and I'm reasoning from that general belief to come to a particular outcome, versus like the hard cognitive work of thinking your way through to an analytical framework of your own. And what I worry about when I've observed my own use of artificial intelligence to do my work, for example, is like I'll generate something and I'll be like, oh, okay, that's good enough. And then I'll read it back after I've sent it to somebody else and have that objectivity of having another set of eyeballs on it and been like, oh, I would never have written it that way.
Right.
And that's because I applied thing one instead of thing two, right? And so even in my own use of AI, I noticed that like, there are things that we do like that are probably good enough to be good enough. And then there's things that we want to do that are actually our hard thinking. And AI tends to make us kind of lean into those evolutionary ways that we can be lazy, right? Where we're trying to minimize energy expenditure and like the hard parts of working, and to confuse the categories of which things we might need to be doing at a
it's high
particular
time for me to like move to topic 2, but I'm not going to, because really we're not done talking about topic 1 until we get to the first paragraph of your essay where you're talking about using AI in war. And also like the AI and like Anthropic argument with the Department of Defense. Could you just say a little bit about how this semantic marker stuff like plays into that conversation?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think what we actually have in a lot of places are communities of practice and communities of interpretation of information. And so you think science has a particular set of truth conditions that it would, this is a concept from like philosophy, right? Or Wittgenstein or whatever. And so you would apply a series of truth conditions to say, this is a thing that's true in science, right? A hypothesis that has to be shown by evidence, et cetera, or truth conditions that apply in journalism, truth conditions that apply in government or in court. Like as a lawyer, there's very particular truth conditions that apply to bring something forward in a court of law, which you've ever watched Law and Order, right? And so those are communities of practice that help us kind of reason in a group, applying our intuitive judgments as experts trained in that community of practice to what is true. And what we saw with the bombing of the school, that was the mistake, that was sort of both a mistaken identity of the school, but also a failure of the community of practice around checking the information.
So we're talking about the first day of Trump's war against Iran. Yeah.
Yeah. In Manab, where like 170 people were killed, most of them school children, many girls. And, so what we learned afterwards was that the community of practice at the Pentagon that was supposed to be checking, on that would have been kind of thinking about the targeting, and double checking it for accuracy had been dismantled by Secretary of War Hegseth. And, the same problems then you can sort of generalize to lethal autonomous weapons and the concerns that Anthropic raised about whether the technology is ready for that. And the conversations about, what does it mean to have a human in the loop? What powers are you giving that human? What's the institutional context? What's the community of practice around the human? And what is the power relationship between what we're allowing the AI to do versus what we're asking of the human to do in a context? And so I think it's all those power relationships that matter more than the roles.
That's a real, yeah. I mean, and I'll say it another way, maybe if you could correct me if you disagree, but like what you were saying earlier is that AI, at least when it's presented in the way that it has been designed to be presented, like it does sort of short circuit our urges to think fast. So we're lazy. So
right.
Like human in the loop doesn't mean much if the human is like conditioned to think lazily. So that brings us finally to our second topic. So we're going to have 2 topics today. That's fine. Which is, there's a Stanford researcher, that you talk about in your essay named Gopnik, and, they're coming up with possible ways of doing better, asking the better questions, having AI designed in order to make us better thinkers. I mean, you tell me.
Yeah. So Alison Gopnik, she wrote all these great books, and she really started her career as a researcher looking at infant development. And what she sort of she devised all these really clever ways of working with very, very young babies to see kind of what they were learning over time and what they were actually doing. And so she has one, I think it's called The Philosopher in the Crib or The Scientist in the Crib or something like that. And basically what she said is, you have a baby and it has a toy and it's dropping the toy out of the crib. So when it drops the toy out of the crib, it's doing several experiments at once. It's actually applying like kind of a scientific mentality, right? And it's dropping the rattle or whatever. And the adult comes and picks it up and says something to the baby and puts it back in the crib. And so the baby learns not only about like the physical properties of the rattle and gravity and what happens when something falls over the edge, right? And that might happen to them, but also like, what do the adults do? And do they put it back? Or do they sound upset? Do they sound friendly? All of that kind of experimentation. She calls it wide lantern learning, which is this kind of like wide open stage of development where children are, as we know, like kind of unpredictable. They're just always trying things. They're hard to control. They won't sit still because they're just taking in so much information all the time and responding to all the stimulus. And she's even said like that part of our kind of intellectual development is we're kind of a different species than we are when we're an adult. And we're applying just all these like executive filters all the time and really just figuring out, okay, what do I need to do today? And you're not in that kind of highly receptive learning
Is
mode.
that like what happens to us when we like get on like mushrooms or something?
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, right. So it like reopens those stages of consciousness. Yeah, probably. It seems to have that effect from reports. But
are we going to say? Hold on a second. Just let me. I am drinking my glass of wine, which is required in the AI Skeptics podcast. But are we going to conclude by saying the folks that are in charge of dropping bombs should be on acid or mushrooms? No, that's not our conclusion, right?
That's not where I'm driving.
Okay.
To be an effective human in the loop, you should.
I'm glad that you're in charge here, Laura. You keep going. Ignore me.
I mean, it would be nice if they would take a chill pill of some kind, right? So I would say, look, the Gopnik stuff is so cool because she's really looking at, developmentally, how do we get to a place where we can make those informed emotional judgments we were talking about with Damasio? Like, how do we learn to be ourselves? What's the stimulus we interact with in the world? What's other people bring to the table? And then how is our self formed and our kind of learning process formed out of that? And, what she's done most recently is with AI, she's trying to develop models that actually interact with people in a way that supports their learning development rather than kind of having them collapse into the thing one. Lazy is a judgmental word. It's actually that we're evolutionarily tuned to like minimize effort to the task at hand, right? Because we have a lot of stuff to do in our lives.
That's how I learned about
we're supposed to like run when there's something dangerous. So we're not supposed to think too hard, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to like go through a detailed calculation to take your hand off the hot pan and the burning, in the stove kind of thing. And that's how I learned about it. I used to work in the field of behavioral science and, evaluating nudges that were all informed by these like, these system one kinds of heuristics that we use. And it was often looked at as like, oh, that's a good thing. It saves time and it just elevates what's most important so that you get out of danger or whatever. I worry with AI, like exactly the dynamic you mentioned at first, which is it gives us a way to avoid system 2 tasks that are very heavy on, they're like really burdensome cognitively. I have to think slowly and deliberately through this thing. Oh, AI is an alternative. I get around that. At the same time, is like ironically, and the few times when we are called upon to review an AI output, that's when we really need our system 2. We need to carefully assess whether there's a hallucination in there or if the argument really makes sense. It exploits our system 1 by being fluent prose. It reads like it sounds pretty believable. What I worry about is that feedback loop. Like we turn to it to avoid doing system 2 thinking. Then our system 2 atrophies and becomes very weak. And then we're unable to actually assess the AI's outputs for important things. And like, does Gopnik have a way around that?
that it would be great to have her on the show and ask her, because I don't know that I'm up to speed on her latest
Or do you have
work.
a way
And I
around
think-
it? That's a better question
yeah,
for you.
well, I would say this, there's a lot of empirical research that's been published recently that shows like they can look at synapses firing when people are using AI or not using AI, or students are doing it for tasks. And the findings are pretty devastating. Like they do show there's less cognitive neural networks that are activated when people are using AI, that there's less recall of the material that after the fact because they're less committed. I find that too. If I use AI for a writing project and I have to go back and reread it and be
Yeah,
like,
it's
oh yeah,
just
that
like-
was actually pretty good, Right, exactly. Because you're not as invested as if you built it sentence by sentence yourself. And I often find also that AI produces too much corpus. Like I end up with like a 40-page document and I'm like, oh, all I needed was an essay. And now I have to sort through and where's the good ideas in here and where's the pieces that actually, so
And
it's
Laura,
almost,
I don't want to stymie your progress in using your brain well, but you could also just go back to the AI and be like, make that 2 pages. That
no,
works.
I know. It's true. But then you're still like,
No, I know.
It almost
I know.
like it overperforms for us
Yeah.
cognitively.
Yes.
And we end up with too much of the material and it's sort of just wrong enough that you can't quite, right? You don't really own it fully. So I do think we have that problem where with, supervising people in the workplace trying to use AI and realizing like, oh, the reason why this document went off the rails there is because they don't have enough expertise in how this document needs to be tuned to an audience to be a better editor than the AI in this moment, just because of their amount of experience in doing these kinds of things. So
Right.
I think that's the apprentice problem that we have, right?
You just
sort of
made me
skipping
realize
over
for the first
stages.
time how much we underappreciated writer's block back when we had it.
Right.
Like writer's block seemed like a problem because we couldn't get stuff written down. And sometimes it was a problem. But now that I think about it, writer's block often happened to people when they didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. And that's okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now it's not stopping them. They just use AI to say something anyway.
Yeah.
I
so
mean, it makes me
it's
think
sort
of
of the slot problem, but at the level of text.
Yeah.
our previous
exactly.
guest, John Warner, right? Has a whole chapter in his book that says writing is thinking. And like, thanks to AI, text generation does not require thinking anymore. So anytime you were faced with writer's block, you can just power through with AI, but it will not include thinking.
Okay, we're gonna use the last 5 minutes to ask like the biggest question, which is great. We love doing that. Stuff it all in. Like these are really important observations, like the embodied notion of decision making, and how AI just doesn't have that to offer. It's not going to happen. The possibility that we might be able to redesign AI, possibly with the help of the Stanford professor that we're going to try to get on our podcast, to make us make us work harder. But what is this like? How does this inform like the future of AI governance, in your opinion, Laura? What does it mean for like how we should think about AI policy?
Yeah, so I have worked on consumer protection and regulation of things like cars and food and health products, dietary supplements. And I would say, look, you move from an understanding of human vulnerabilities to harm to the regulatory solutions. And those might be, in this case, domain specific. So like if you're thinking about education, you bring researchers in who are like familiar with stages in child development, and you think about the harms at very specific stages of child development and learning processes based on what we understand to be true. And the other thing is, if that feels overwhelming, we actually the larger us, has a lot of data about the harms. It's just in the hands of companies who've never been told by the government that they have to give it up and share what they know about all of the millions or billions of interactions that they've logged and how they've shaped their algorithms around it, how they've shaped their products around it. That is not really the typical case. Like if you think about a drug company going to FDA or the automobile coming into regulation in the 60s and being pretty heavily regulated in terms of crash tests and understanding what the companies know, even after the Ford Firestone, where they were told they had to report on deaths and injuries in cars in the U.S. So, that is something that we have allowed in terms of the concentrated power and knowledge which are the same thing, and extracted profits to accumulate in the tech sector to a really unhealthy degree. And I'm very optimistic about the product liability line of cases. I think a lot of what we're seeing on the preemption push at the federal level is not about the state rules, which are pretty weak, but are about trying to cut off the tort liability at the knees so that the companies don't have to disgorge all of these internal documents that show what they know when they
You just went way, way deep first, but like, I'm going to back you up for a second. Can you, because I know you're an expert in this and it's really amazing to have you on. I'm also curious because I often, when I talk about AI harm and like the need for, by the way, like case by case, like use case by use case thinking through like what could go wrong for whom and how do you prevent that? How do you measure whether it's happening? How do you mitigate it if it's happening? So we're like 100% with you over here at Ocean about how it's like, it's going to be nuanced. It's going to be contextual. Like you have to think case by case. But I often use the analogy or the metaphor of like, when the car was invented, it was super exciting, but then people saw that people just died. Like it was dangerous. Like we saw deaths by the side of the road. And my assumption was, and I don't know anything about history, so I was just like, and then seatbelts and airbags. But I know you know way more about that. So can you just say a little bit more?
Yeah. So I worked for Joan Claybrook, who worked with Ralph Nader for 10 years at Public Citizen when I first came out of law school. And what happened actually was there was a huge knockdown, drag out fight where the auto industry, Unsafe at Any Speed, came out, and the auto industry hired like people to try to follow Ralph Nader and spy on him to find dirt on him and disqualify him. He actually won money damages from them for intimidating a witness in Congress after that happened. So it was a big fight. And so there was this guy named Bill Haddon, and he was an epidemiologist actually who thought about public health. The industry's line at the time was that all injury crashes were inevitable. The injuries and crashes were inevitable, that it was the nut behind the wheel. It was just that people didn't know how to drive.
I'm just going to pause you there, Laura, because
yeah,
it just hits me. And I saw that line in your essay, like nut behind the wheel, that the current chatbot defense of like teen suicides is like, this kid was going to kill themselves anyway because they were disturbed. So it's like, it's eerie.
It's exactly the same.
No, it's exactly. And so if you think about it from a public health perspective, which is like this idea of the pump handle, you shut off the pump handle that's exposing everyone to malaria in the city of London or whatever, you figure out the system problem. So Haddon said, look, some amount of vehicle crashes are inevitable, right? People are going to make mistakes. The question is, do they get impaled on the stick shift? Does the vehicle absorb the crash energy and G forces that are like from running into a tree, or does the human body inside the car absorb it? And so it's like when you're a scout and you're building kind of a container to drop an egg, like how much energy can you transfer to the container so that the egg is safe? So we're like the eggs, right? We're like this very fragile kind of form inside this vehicle that's going 70 miles an hour. You have to figure out how you're going to work with the physics of that. And it's been a 70-year process. There's big engineering trade-offs. Like if you're building an airbag for a 100-pound woman in the front seat or a 300-pound man. And so you pick like sweet spots in the technology of how you're going to have to trade off protectiveness. And over time, you design advanced airbags that can adjust to the particular crash dynamics. So that has been a learning process through looking at the limitations of the human in a context in which there's great potential for harm. I think that's what we need to do with AI.
I think it's such a great
and you've also just
parallel.
introduced the name of this episode is Where the Egg. Sorry, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I do. I like that. It's like, I think it's kind of cool how the way that car crashes were reframed, right? From it's not the nut behind the wheel. It's like accidents are inevitable. It almost like depersonalizes the issue of the harm and turns it into a physics problem, as you pointed out. What's the G forces? What's the what's the force the body is subjected to? But that's really in service of a very humanistic goal. Like they wanted to make the cars safer to save people. And earlier we were talking about how decisions have to be embodied and humanistic to like in the somatic marker stuff. So it's just interesting how anthropomorphizing or personalizing, it can help or it can hurt. It's sort of like a rhetorical tactic in a way. And I would say from an ocean perspective, we're completely aligned. As Kathy said, it's like you have to just identify the harm, measure it in a very like boring technical way, but somehow you have to know in your mind, like that is a real harm that matters to somebody in a subjective, personal way. The interplay between those like anodyne technical stuff versus subjective personal stuff is, I think it's just fascinating.
Well, I would take a slightly different lens to it, Jake. It's like personal responsibility versus statistical fact about like how the world actually works, and like who's like making it more of a socialized responsibility to address it. Anyway, Laura, it's just.
I would also just say, like that tech is this cross-cutting thing, but we haven't applied this very domain-specific knowledge. So we have a whole ethics of how you work with kids. The educational experts know how to do that, or how you give psychological counseling to people in a responsible way that doesn't have transference, right? So we just have allowed technology to pretend like it can solve every problem in every context and ignored all of the human domain-specific kind of information that we have about how to do that ethically.
I could not think of a better way to end this wonderful conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us, Laura. I love you.
It was such a pleasure.
Oh my God, you're amazing. And everybody, thanks for listening to the AI Skeptics podcast, and I hope you arrived to work safely. Join us next week.
Next time.
Just hoping to be safe. Just hoping to be safe.